Thank you everyone for joining our user group session. So our topic today has to do with hosting and deployment of our key applications. Obviously, our concern is around our facilities applications like Archibus. So that's what we're going to kind of have a conversation about today. As far as what we're going to talk through, pretty straightforward. I'm going to make a quick introduction just to kind of set the stage, make sure that we're kind of using similar or the same language, because there are a lot of different terms that get thrown around, and we kind of want to keep things understandable for everybody together. So I'm going to introduce why we might be asked to choose how we're hosting an application, whether that be cloud or some of the other options we'll talk about. I'm going to introduce those options, and that's kind of where we'll set the stage for the language that we're going to use. And I'll introduce some common considerations that we're seeing, and that'll be kind of our prompt to start a discussion. We have Wayne here who's going to kind of moderate a quick panel to get us started, and then we'll open up the floor. So why are we being asked to decide how we're hosting, how we're deploying our applications? If you're being asked about that decision, you've probably seen an image like that iceberg image on the right. And obviously it's a great visualization for a common scenario, but not everybody's scenario, where costs for an on-premise type solution are being hidden. So that's one reason, assumptions around cost. There are assumptions or a reality around the ease of maintenance, depending on different deployment models. Performance and stability become considerations, and a big one is offloading risk, taking that off of your own shoulders in some cases. So what are the options really? So these are kind of the industry terms that we see getting thrown around, sometimes on a technical front, a lot of times on a marketing front. So we have from left to right, we have our on-premise, we have what's called infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, and then software as a service. And basically, these are different degrees of offloading some of the responsibility for hosting, maintaining, controlling an application to a vendor or to another service provider. Obviously, a lot of these terms have lots of baggage around them. They've become more marketing terms than really technical terms. So we're kind of thinking of it as how hands-off are things going to be. To try and distill that down, we wanted to simplify down to terms that kind of make sense in our industry and in what we're seeing, and streamline the conversation that we're about to have. So where you see on the screen here, public cloud, that's kind of thinking of a SaaS type model. So this is, you're really fast, really straightforward, streamlined, not as configurable. Then we have our private cloud, and that kind of covers that infrastructure as a service, platform as a service realm. Some of the other aspects of your SaaS and your on-premise are also available in the cloud, but essentially this is to meet specific needs, finding a balance that suits a given organization's needs across that spectrum that we saw at the beginning. On the enterprise side, that's traditionally where your on-premise would fit, but as we're seeing, a lot of organizations are taking what would have been true on-premise, something like a data center in your office building, and putting that in a cloud offering, but still maintaining it as if it's a data center that you own. So that's why we're kind of calling it enterprise. Gives you the most flexibility, of course, but there are, of course, trade-offs for that. So what are those trade-offs? This is a quick table that we threw together just to kind of get your thoughts going. These vary quite widely, and it is, of course, what we're here to discuss. So some of these are common experiences that we see. There are a ton more factors that play into the decision of deployment, how to host. So we can add to this as we discuss or make updates. Some of the things that we'll call out, and these might be totally different in a given organization, is for the enterprise side of things, understanding who's paying the bill when costs are shared throughout the organization or for different applications. How is that being distributed? Having that understanding. On the private and public cloud side of things, we have the idea of specialization of support, having that kind of application-specific experience. The other piece of that is often speed to make changes, upgrade, add pieces, make adjustments that you want. On the private cloud side of things, you have a bit more control over timing, and that flows into the enterprise as well. So these are just some common considerations that we're seeing, and I think we have a lot of people who have experience with this on the call today. So we'd like to get your insight. And for that, I'm actually going to hand things over to Wayne, our managing partner here at Horizant, who's got a few people he's going to introduce who have some thoughts on this to talk through and get us started on our discussion. So take it away, Wayne.
Thanks, Nick. And I'll just pick up on the screen because I think there's a couple of key points here to remember when we talk about a private cloud that sometimes gets blurred between the enterprise and the private cloud. So what we see is when clients come to us and say, hey, can you host our application? That to us is a private cloud that we're setting up for them. So it might be in Microsoft Azure or in Amazon, something along those lines. But like Nick mentioned, there are cases where clients, instead of having it on your, the traditional server that's somewhere on your floor, that your IT departments have gone and signed up perhaps with Amazon or with Microsoft, but internalized that cloud hosting, meaning it's their own private instance of cloud. So if you're not familiar with that, that's kind of what we see pretty common these days, is that there's a policy or a mandate to go cloud, but that's still within the boundaries of your organization. They're not necessarily looking for a partner like Horizon to host that. So to get things going, I'm going to ask Iain to launch a quick poll, and I'll ask you guys to go answer the questions. I've tried to categorize it in the ways that we traditionally see in our client base, and just to get a sense around who has what, and then I'll bring a couple of folks into the conversation. So I'm asking you to pick one of these. Again, the software as a service, Nick mentioned about the marketing terms that are used. That's probably the most common one that's being used now, right? Software as a service covers a wide range of things and sometimes can be misleading, but that's that you fit inside a nice tidy box and of functionality, and it's a faster hosted deployment. Hosted by Horizant is, again, a version of the private cloud that we offer clients. Hosted through your internal IT, again, is a private cloud, but within your organization. And then the traditional on-premise server. Let's see, we're almost at 100% voted. So if anybody's either not paying attention or remaining, we'll give it another 10 seconds here and see. So interesting, it's pretty evenly distributed for the first three. The SaaS having the 14%, the hosted by Horizon 14%, the internally hosted is 14%, and the traditional on-premise server. So this is a great starting point for our conversation. We can actually leave that up on screen, Iain, for a little while longer, because I think I'm gonna bring Dan and Steve into the conversation. So I reached out to a number of you, and I appreciate those that said, well, maybe next time. But Dan and Steve have agreed to kind of informally talk about their experiences with respect to their particular environments. And also the next question we're going to have is around decision making. And so they'll kind of lead us into that. I'm not sure, Dan, if you want to go first and give a quick intro of who you are, and you can share some of your thoughts on this whole idea of deployment models.
Good morning, Wayne and the user group, or I guess good afternoon. Yeah, my name is Dan McCarthy, and I work in the IT department at a government department at Privy Council, and we have had Archibus integrated with the AutoCAD product and it's been hosted internally for, I guess, over 10 years. I want to say 15 years or more, and we've gone through various upgrades, hosting with on-premise servers, typically Windows servers, and we would typically have a database server to hold the database, and typically a web server to run the web application and run the web service, which we've been using Tomcat for, but I understand there's choices. And that works well in terms of the client is comfortable, or our internal clients are comfortable when the data, in particular the AutoCAD drawings, stay on-prem. But it's interesting to look at these other options like software as a service hosted by Horizant. Like most government departments, we are in the process of migrating a number of workloads or applications to a cloud service. We're migrating a number of them to Microsoft Azure. So we are familiar with that migration, having gone through a process where a number of them have migrated to that or in the process of. And this Archibus application didn't seem to be a candidate. It wasn't selected early on as a candidate, so it basically didn't sort of make it through that path, and I think it had to do with the sensitivity of the data. But I can see the advantage of software as a service or hosted by Horizant or hosted in cloud, because it offloads a lot of the IT work, like to set up the servers and to integrate them and support them, and in particular data migration as you're going from version to version. The data migration, when we go from one version to another, is a bit of a challenge. Like there's tools and so on available, but it's not something we're clicking through. It's sort of a project on its own. So I guess I would say we're committed to the on-prem, for this upgrade. I wasn't really asked to get involved in looking at the other options, but I didn't actually bring them forward, or wasn't asked to. It was another sort of cloud migration team that was involved in like selecting candidates. So we're going on-prem for this upgrade, but this would have been a good conversation to have with the people who were looking at the migration options a few months ago or a year ago. And I guess the other thing I would add is we're a relatively small department and a relatively small Archibus shop, so when we do a server setup or server migration, we usually need some assistance from our partners such as Horizant, or at one point we used to get some guidance from the PSPC geomatics team, and we still have some limited conversation with them. So it's always good to get advice from your other government colleagues and the available companies like Archibus and Horizant to get some help with the server setup and all that when you're going through that, because there's a lot to it. Maybe I should leave it there, Wayne, and let someone else talk.
No, it's good. Actually, I'm going to pick up on a couple of points before I bring Steve into the dialogue. I mean, security you talked about, so certainly that drives decisions around both on-premise as well as the idea of hosted, right? And ensuring that if there is a path to hosted, most organizations have pretty strict policies around either what can be hosted, but also if they say yes, the guardrails, if you will, around those hosted environments. So that's still an evolution. And the other point that you talked about, which is also probably familiar to a lot of the attendees, is this idea that some of the IT decisions are either not theirs to make from a business line perspective, or perhaps there isn't the same connectivity to, you alluded to the fact that that transformation team looked at different applications and made a decision, and perhaps their understanding of Archibus and what it does was limited, so it got skipped over. So the idea of the interaction amongst the teams and the knowledge sharing amongst the teams might drive to more options being available to the clients when they might want to either upgrade or migrate. And the last point I think that's key to focus on that you talked about is the expertise sometimes required, whether it's on the application or even on the IT side specific to the application. You know, if you're only coming at and looking at that once a year, you don't necessarily have that center of expertise that you build, so you end up relying on outside vendors. So sometimes the cloud might be a better way to get the help from the outside vendors. I don't want to say I'm paraphrasing what you said, but are those some good kind of points that you were highlighting?
They are some great points, Wayne, and yeah, you're right on about which teams decide, you know, what the path forward is, and the teams mate. I really wasn't aware of some of these options for Archibus, and so I didn't feed into them, but I kind of wasn't key to that decision. There was other architects and analysts sort of looking at it, but I think if they saw this view, they might be considering, you know, a wider range of deployment options.
Yeah.
Such as Azure, because we're migrating a lot to that, or whatever else was appropriate.
Yeah.
And you know, about the expertise, as a small shop, I might deal with user issues from time to time, or when there's a bit of a staff turnover, or when a new PC has to be set up and we've got to install AutoCAD and Smart Client. But I might not be involved in server migrations. You know, it might be 5 or 6 years between a migration. You know, it might be driven, let's say, by, you know, the AutoCAD's aging out, or Archibus is aging out, or we have to move to new servers. So every 5 or 6 years doesn't make you an expert in the server setup or the migration, even if you might have done it a couple of cycles. So it is, I feel like every time it's a learning process, and I feel in our case having, you know, some support from Horizant, either, you know, with the project model or support hours is sort of one of the keys to success. But I could imagine another version where instead of doing on-prem, we decide to, you know, host externally to offload sort of the load on the IT people, and I can see the advantages of that for sure.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. And again, you're talking to some points that we'll get to in the next poll, which has to do with decisions and whatnot. So thanks for weighing in on that. Steve, if you're unmuted, come on in and let's share some of your perspectives on that. You can introduce yourself and have a quick chat.
All right, my name's Steve Hogan, and I work for PSPC within the government, and I am not a day-to-day user of Archibus, but work on part of the contract management side of it, and then assist a few business lines who use Archibus within the department. We have 3 deployments of Archibus within PSPC, and all of them are different to an extent. So I'll go through them kind of quickly. So we've had Archibus in the department since at least 1998. It might have been before that, but at least 1998. So one of our main instances is an on-premise solution managed and controlled by IT within PSPC and DSB. That team has a huge amount of knowledge base because they've been using the tool for quite a long time. They have manuals, or quite thick manuals, describing the upgrade process, as our instance is quite customized and quite complicated. So they fully understand what they need to do and the process to do that. Mainly because we've been doing upgrades every other year for the last 20-ish years, 30 years. So there's a huge knowledge base. The application currently is currently deployed on just a server farm based out of Barrie, or I believe that's where it is. I'm not 100% sure. And it is being considered to be moved to the internal PSPC cloud. So that would be that hosted through your own cloud solution that we're going through. So it hasn't been confirmed yet, but it is a candidate for our internal deployment. We also have 2 other deployments. Both of them are software as a service. One of those solutions, Horizant basically does 100% of the work on our behalf. They do all the P-lining and data entry of the AutoCAD files. They do the maintenance and control of the application, as well as, and then internally, all we do is text-based data management and user management, but we're not doing the AutoCAD portion yet. The other option we have is also a cloud-based solution where the application is deployed and managed by Horizant. They do all of the data upgrades and all the technical upgrades, the customization to the application, but all data within the application, including the AutoCAD drawings, the management of that and storage of that, is done internally to the department. Each of these environments, decisions were made to get to them based on mainly time frame and money. The on-premise solution, like I say, it's been around since 1998 at least. So the only solution at that point was on-premise, and because we're on-premise, we've just continued to stay that way. The other 2 environments had quick turnarounds. One of them needed access to not only people within the government, but external to the government, and PSPC couldn't offer that in a short time frame. So Horizant was brought on. We went to Horizont as a result of that. And then the other one needed all government departments with a very quick turnaround. So again, we were unable to deploy an environment fast enough to meet that need, so we used the external cloud. I think all of them have I think they're all in the right spots. They're being managed in ways that make sense. You do need to have the skill sets, like Dan said earlier, you need to have those skill sets internally to be able to do what you need, on that IT side. So we were quite lucky to have that basically through, years and years of experience and lots of knowledge transfer down. But for some of those new environments where we needed to do processes like automated data loading of AutoCAD drawings in a very short time frame, we leveraged, Horizon's experience to allow us to help do that. But once we had created the process to do that, we made them reverse engineer it to make our drawings more accessible. So yeah, I think that's. Do we need more than that? I don't know what more to add there, but.
Thanks, Steve. I'll actually pick up on a couple of points. I mean, one of the things that drove some of the deployments, as you say, was nothing else was available. We'll call it pre-Amazon when the deployment first occurred in PSPC. So that was really the option. And it is interesting you talk about the server farms, because again, within the Government of Canada, that's that idea of the hosted through your internal IT, where IT have struck up an agreement for server farms, and so it's hosted, but it's within, we'll call it within your firewall on that. And you pointed out another thing I think that influences the decisions to which platform people go to, which is the idea of the services that are available. Sometimes on the traditional on-premise, it becomes more difficult for an external vendor to provide whatever it might be, whether it's data, whether it's CAD services or anything like that, that it can influence the accessibility to the servers or to the application on that front. So it's great that you're able to give the perspective that for one client, there's 2 different models that satisfy the different businesses that are being done inside of PSPC. So thanks for that, Steve. I don't know if you had anything else to add, because I'm going to reach into.
I was just going to add one other thing to kind of define why we have the different environments, because again, most people wouldn't have 3 environments. They wouldn't even think to go down that path, right? But we have 3 the same drawing can't be used across the 3 business lines that we need to do, right? How we measure space and define space is unique within PSPC. It needs to be in its own environment. That drawing can't be leveraged by some of the other instances necessarily. And the granularity of how we collect data is important as well, right? Because if you're only going to if you don't care about the individual offices, but just the space, but somebody else needs so the decision to have the 3 environments is fully driven by the reason of the business need as opposed to the deployment location. So
yeah, that's a good point, actually. You know, the diversity of the functions, right, where you go at a broader audience with, you know, room and desk booking, that type of hybrid work can be served where you have multiple clients, multiple departments that are accessing something that's hosted, where if it was on an internal server, there'd be another dynamic of how a different department comes in and accesses data that's parked on a PSPC server. So that's a factor that's unique to PSPC, but the function is narrow, but the reach is wide. And then when you go to the lease or the space agreements between the departments, that's again a case of that data being available to others, but in a different way. So thanks for that, Steve. I'm going to kind of open it to the audience. I'm going to get Iain to launch the next poll, which is around, you know, the decision factors. And these are just some. You know, I'm happy for people to put their hand up and be unmuted to either share their experiences based on the conversation so far, or if there's something glaringly missing from this list of the decisions that why people are doing things. So Iain, if anybody wants to speak up, they can raise their hand and you can unmute them. I'm encouraging people to share their experiences. I'm watching the poll here as we, so far legacy is winning. Interestingly enough, there's been no votes for IT policy of a cloud first kind of policy, but we'll see where we land once we get everybody voted in here. Iain, anybody showing interest to express an opinion or voice?
Not yet. You might have to pick someone up from the crowd if it comes to it.
I know who's out there, so oh, I see a hand up. Do I see a hand up? No.
Yeah, you do.
Melanie?
I'm muting. Yeah, there we go. There you go. Melanie, you are unmuted now.
Hi, Mel. Oh, can we hear Mel yet?
Not yet.
Might be muted on your side. We can allow you to unmute, but you might still be muted.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I think she's
you might have to unmute yourself, Mel.
Well,
Oh, hello.
Oh,
we go.
hello.
Oh,
Mel.
hi, Wayne. Yeah, at the health authority, I mean, in BC, we're hearing from.
Oh, we had you and we lost you. Mel, I don't know if you went back on mute.
Azure cloud.
Oh, you're back now. We lost you for a second there.
Oh, okay, sorry, poor connection. So at the BC health authorities, there's recently cloud first policy coming down from management. IT is catching up on providing and even approving and encouraging cloud hosting of applications, business applications. So we do have a lot of applications moving up to the cloud as a strategy right now. So I am interested in hearing more about the cloud hosting, different options for with Archibus.
For sure. Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Mel. And again, I'm familiar with the idea of seeing that. Iain, if you want to share the results, that'd be great, please. This idea of policy is definitely something that we've seen before. And again, we talked about it a little bit with Dan earlier, which is, whether you're in the line of vision, or some might argue the line of fire of that policy. If you're interested internally, I think certainly putting your hand up and making sure. I know some of the audience here today are from IT, and some are, more on the business side. But if the business kind of reaches out, we see more often than not that they're already connected, but seeing what options are available to you internal to your organization might offer different ways to efficiencies to be gained, or things that can benefit how you interact with the application. But a lot of times, it's that I'm going back to the traditional view of things. It's that CAD application, right? Archibus is that CAD application. So we don't want to talk about hosting a CAD application. There might be a bit of that legacy thinking around that. So IT policy comes in at a 7%, technical needs. So business requirements driving 14% of the decisions. And then the idea of, we'll just call it executive decision as to which way you want to go, 21. And not surprisingly, 57% coming in with the legacy. That's the way it's always been. Archibus is an application that for many of you has been installed for a long, long time. So that was just the way it was installed originally, and status quo remains the way to do it on that. Does anybody else have any thoughts or questions or comments that they want to share on this? No hands popping up. All right, well, thanks. Oh, Steve, you got something else you want to add?
I was just going to add something that my comment was going to be along the lines of, if you just make the decision to go to a cloud, it's not as simple as just saying, I want to go to the cloud and I want to be hosted by Horizant, right? Your IT community needs to be fully involved, and at least from a government perspective, to allow for the hosting space to be there, to make sure that the security concerns, and I know Horizon, you guys you're meeting all of those needs. You do it for us, but I think people need to be prepared for that. It's not a quick turnaround, right? There is a time frame involved in that, and people need. And then there's also the requirement of Archibus requires things to be installed on your computer. So just because you put it to the cloud doesn't necessarily mean you're avoiding the internal IT component, right?
Yeah.
So if your team does anything within Smart Client or does the AutoCAD piece or the extension pieces, those things need to be installed in your environment, and whether that's through a packaging and deployment process, or you can just install whatever you want, you need to be prepared for that, right? And build that into your cycle. So I just wanted to add that in there as well. So
no, thanks, Steve. That's a good point. Now, that applies whether that's something that is a Horizon service or again an internal service. There's still an IT component, an internal IT component that talks about everything that Steve just covered, right? The smart client, or the pipe out to a web page or anything along those lines. And of course, security more than ever for clients. So I don't think it's unique to the Government of Canada. I think that the client base across the board are having to engage IT as well as be aware of the security requirements on that. So yeah, that's good to pay attention. I think the next poll that we're going to get into, the next two polls we're going to get into, are going to be for those that are in the cloud and those that are in the on-premise, and just trying to get to a benefits kind of conversation. So Iain, you can launch the next one. I can't remember if the next one is the cloud one or the on-prem. So this is cloud. So if you are cloud, I'd be curious to see where you feel you're getting benefits from your cloud deployment. And then the next poll that we're going to do right after is for the folks that are on premise, and asking, where you see the benefits, because I think there's benefits that everybody that spoke today has highlighted the fact that depending on the requirement, there are benefits to the situation. So if anybody that's cloud-based wants to pick some of these, we'll give it a good minute of polling and just see. I don't remember the stats on how many were in the cloud, but I know there was, I think, 57% that were on premise. So we'll see more data on the next poll on that. Okay, still some stuff coming in. So if you want to share it, Iain, and it'll give us some at least baseline, and we'll compare that to the so performance, kind of 2/3 of the audience talking about flexibility. That can be pretty broad statement. Cost, and then pretty resounding 100% on the make changes upgradability. Again, this is a multiple selection poll, so that's why it doesn't add up to 100%. But everybody agreed that making changes in upgradability from a cloud is definite benefit to that. Okay, great. Appreciate everybody's input on that. If you want to throw the next poll up, Iain, it'll be interesting to compare now this to the on-prem side. And again, you can pick any and all that apply. So if you've got an on-prem or whatnot, and Iain, we can collate these and share them back out to the audience afterwards.
I believe so. I'll go back and dig in the settings after.
Yeah, we'll get them compiled and send them so you kind of see what people are saying. And if there's if you think there's something missing in here, feel free to throw it into the questions if you're too shy to speak up on that front. And actually, while the poll is running, it brings up a point. We've seen this a lot in conversations when a client's moving from on-prem to some sort of cloud environment. And many times the discussion comes back down to, well, I'm starting to get a bill now for my cloud, and I never got a bill for my on-premise. And Nick alluded to that earlier, where internal IT costs sometimes are not as clearly delineated when you have an on-premise versus when you are going to a cloud. You get a bill and you see the bill very clearly, and you pay that bill, versus internally it might be kind of buried into other services that you're getting in IT. So many times clients aren't able to compare apples to apples on the cost front because of the way traditionally IT services are delivered inside of an organization. It's just something to pay attention to when all of a sudden somebody says your hosting cost is X, and you're like, I don't see that in my bill from my internal IT. It might take a little bit of digging to understand that. Okay, let's share this one. Performance, flexibility, cost, make changes. The biggest difference, I think, is in the last two, where you see the make changes upgradability being a little less here and the integration being higher. I think some of the other elements were similar. The cost here might have a higher benefit than on the cloud. Again, I'll challenge everybody to find their actual bill of internal IT and see how that translates into hosting. Okay, good data. Anything to add? Anybody have anything to add to this? Brian, let's get Brian online here.
Yep. Brian, you got the floor.
Hello, everyone.
Hello,
Brian Rosser here. Hi, Wayne. I'm work with Melanie here at the BC Health Authorities. We manage 4 Lower Mainland health authorities, and we're also a longtime Archibus user on premise for since 1998 as well. We have deployed one of the health regions to the cloud, and just for hoteling purposes, because they want it to be always on the latest version. And that's the hugest benefit with the cloud solution is a SaaS solution is that you are constantly running the current and latest version. Some challenges with this solution is we have found performance issues and sometimes latency issues with the SaaS solution versus our on-premise solution. So that's something to be considered about. And we also noticed that it can be difficult to implement changes to the SaaS solution versus the on-prem, because on-prem you have the full flexibility of doing what you want to it. But with the SaaS solution, when it comes to upgrade times, the views don't always come across as being transferred automatically. Sometimes you have to follow up with the SaaS provider and say, hey, my view didn't go across. Can you make sure it goes across? And then you have to test and make sure it's working. Usually that happens, but we've had difficulties with views that we've created that didn't quite work out with each upgrade that we've done. There's always been issues with it. So that's just a few comments from our side.
Thanks, Brian. Actually, those are great. And one thing that I want to highlight in what Brian shared is earlier on when we're looking at the different models, as Nick described them, there was the idea of the SaaS, and what Brian's referring to is again that we internally call it public cloud, and it's more commonly known in the industry as software as a service, SaaS. And it does, as Brian highlights, it does, I'm going to say box you in. I mean, he highlighted the idea of being able to make some changes to some views. The upgrade path within the SaaS has had some bumps, and Brian alluded to those where there's a bit more QA involved when a client makes changes, and then the new instance comes into that public side of things, that they kind of lose those and they need to be reinstated. What I want to highlight is that backs down into the idea of the private cloud, where that's also an option to take and have a more personal environment as opposed to that generic one that gets upgraded quarterly by Archibus. And in the private one, in a lot of the cases, what we're doing is we're doing perhaps annual upgrades or 2 upgrades a year. So you have a little more control over the upgradability. Again, if your goal is to be on the latest and greatest version on a quarterly basis, that can still be applied to the private cloud. That's default, the setting in the public cloud, the SaaS version of that. But Brian highlights, some different challenges with respect to the different environments on that. So thank you for sharing that, Brian. Okay, we're, I think, kind of coming to the end here. I don't know that there's anything else unless there's some questions that we're seeing, or whether anybody has their hand up and wants to weigh in on something else. So I got Mel, I see that just popped up.
Hello. Another question about the SaaS offering is the pricing model. So the last time we were asking about it for wider adoption, for to accommodate more of the health authorities here, but the pricing model wasn't a fit for us, because then the current pricing model is based on the square footage, right?
Yep.
You have, but then we're a big, customer with like how many million square feet of space. So that the pricing model back then a few years ago really wouldn't really work for us.
Right.
Sort of like we sort of like reached the max.
I think we lost Mel for a second. So Mel, I'm gonna assume I'm gonna just jump in, and the pricing model is still the same for the Archibus SaaS, which is the square footage, square meter model. There has been conversations corporately with them about, call it unifying their pricing model and possibly going away from square footage on the SaaS. They haven't got there yet, so I can certainly keep you apprised of that. we have had situations where we've had those conversations with clients and saying, we want to go cloud, we want to have the agility to do upgrades. What are our options? And the two options that we present typically are the SaaS, which has the square footage model, or the private cloud, which has a more traditional licensing model that can still satisfy a large footprint organization like yours, and avoid getting into this idea of cost per square footage on that. So the good news is there are options, and we just need to kind of weigh all of the I'm going to say the needs that you have and give you a recommendation on that. So that might be something that we could certainly follow up on as to expanding room booking in your particular case, room and desk booking to a broader audience by bringing it into a private cloud, and it offers a different licensing model. So we'll make a note to follow up with Mel. Hopefully that makes sense to everybody, that the models that Archibus offers does vary. If you're not familiar, the Archibus SaaS is a square footage, square meter model. And then any other licensing model is, I'm going to call it user-based, right? Where you decide that you have 10 users or 1,000 users, whatever the case might be, and certain functionality gets licensed accordingly. Okay, I'm not seeing any other hands. Thanks, Mel, for that question and bringing that topic to the front. If there's no other questions, I think we have one last poll. Am I right, Nick, where we're going to just talk about next? Again, these are just ideas that we have. If you want to vote for what you'd like to see next. If there's something else you want to see, send us an email or put it in the Q&A, and we can weigh in on what the next topic will be. This is meant to be for all of us to discuss, so I'm happy to get your feedback. It's bouncing all over right now as everybody furiously adds. And again, this is a select all that apply, right? If you've got 3 of these that you want to hear about, then please do check them all, and we'll make sure to include them in the list on that.
Yeah, and on that topic, if you have on any of these or anything else that that comes in, if you have experience with it, you have some hurdles that you encountered that you want to float to the group, or you have some success that you've had that you want to share for everybody else, make their lives easier, definitely reach out on that too.
Yeah. We'll give it another 10 seconds. If you haven't voted, please let us know. And again, if nothing here is really kind of resonating with you, we definitely want to hear on other topics. And of course, we're going to look at these topics, and we're going to then reach out to all of you to participate and share with your experiences. Okay, so the mobile app and Archibus upgrades are kind of 1 and 2, followed closely by the digital transformation. That can be a big bucket. And then a tie with the Revit BIM and building condition and reporting. We did find, if you've been following our knowledge series, and if you haven't, they are posted on YouTube. I'd encourage you to go take a look at those. The one that's probably got the most visits so far has been the BIM, the Revit topic. So we expected some good interest in that. Okay. Thanks for doing that, everybody, and giving us some direction on that. I will gladly be quiet now and let Nick and Iain kind of close us off.
Yeah, thanks everyone for joining. Thanks for all the feedback, and thanks to those who have experience and who shared it. It's always good to hear what's happening, and I'm sure for everybody on the line as well. Great to get that context. Thanks, Wayne, for moderating. and looking forward to the next one. As always, if you have any questions on this topic or any other topics, send us a note.